Hello again and welcome to this second video in the tutorial series of developing web applications with ASP.NET 4.5 with the WebForms paradigm. My name is Cociuba, and in the last tutorial when we left off we were looking at the Visual Studio 2012 project template and some of the new stuff that has been added into this template, as well as some of the new features that have been introduced into Visual Studio 2012. So today I want to continue working on the authentication part of the website. To do that, let me just really quickly run the website again and show you where we left off, in which we had a user already created with the forms-based authentication for the website, and the username was Paul. So let's just type in Paul back in, and with the password, and if we put the login button, Paul will be automatically authenticated, and I can see up here it says hello Paul, so the website now knows that Paul is an authenticated user. And remember, this comes out of the box and works with SQL Server local DB, and the database is stored on a file which is located in the app data folder, and you can see the ASP.NET Web Sample MDF and LDF are the two database files that are containing all of the necessary information for ASP.NET to store users, to authenticate them, and to contain all of the profile and role-based information that is needed. So what I said last time was that ASP.NET 4.5 comes with what are called universal membership providers, and these let you target a whole bunch of SQL Server databases, from SQL Server Local DB, which is the simplest one and comes with Visual Studio 2012 and is perfect for development, to production servers like SQL Server 2005, 2008, or 2012, and SQL Azure, which is SQL running in the Windows Azure cloud. So today I want to change the authentication store of my database, of my project, to no longer point to the SQL Server local DB database, but to actually point to a SQL Server database. So I have a SQL Server 2008 running on my machine. So I've opened up a SQL Server Management Studio, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new database, and I'm going to call this database Web Sample Auth Store, Authentication Store, and I'm going to create it. Now, SQL Server creates a new empty database. If I look in the tables or in the views folder, I can see that they're both empty. So I will need to create the infrastructure that is needed for the database to contain all of the user data and the role data necessary for ASP.NET to work and to authenticate users. And to do that, what I can do is I can use a tool that comes with the .NET framework. So I'm going to launch this tool via command line, and the thing I want to show is that you want to make sure that the command line is run with administrative privileges. So go ahead and right click the command line prompt and say run as administrator, otherwise the tool will not be able to run properly. So now I'm going to navigate into the Windows installation folder, which is Windows, and then I'm going to navigate into the Microsoft.NET folder, and then into the framework folder, and then I'm going to navigate into the v.4.0 folder, which is containing the .NET Framework 4.0 installation on my machine. And in this folder we have a tool called ASP.NET _reg SQL, which I'm going reg SQL, which I'm going to be running with a command line parameter of -W. So it's going to actually launch a user interface wizard, which is going to run me through all of the stages needed to create the database tables, views, and store procedures. So here we go. We're going to run this now, and what I see is that I get a graphical user interface wizard, and I'm going to say next to start the wizard, and it's asking me what do I want to do. So I want to configure a new SQL Server database to work for application services. That's correct. And Now it's asking me where is the SQL Server located. So my machine name is dev-web 11, and on this machine I've installed a SQL Server named instance. A named instance might is something to allow you to have several instances of SQL Server running on the same machine. So I always use named instances on my machine. So the name instance name is base server. And I can see this if I look in the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio on the top node in my hierarchy here. I can see the machine name plus the instance name. So I want to use SQL Server Authentication to actually connect to the database. And so let me put in the SA username here and the password. And if all of these credentials are correct, when I deploy the drop-down list, I will be able to see all of the databases that are in SQL Server. So I see my web sample auth store. And if I click on next, it's going to give me a summary of all the settings that are going to be applied. And clicking on next is actually going to apply those settings for me. So here we go. The settings have been applied, so I can click on finish. Now that I've clicked on finish, I can come back into SQL Server Manager, Management Studio, and I can look at the web sample auth store, and I can see that there's a bunch of tables that have been created. There are a bunch of views that have been created, and if I actually want to drill down deeper into programmability, I can actually go into store procedures and see all of the store procedures that are necessary for the SQL membership provider that comes with the universal providers to actually go and talk to the database. So that's all I need to do on the database side. Now I'm going to jump back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to configure my website to point to the new instance of the database that I just created. To do that, I'm going to modify the web.config file, and in the web.config file I'm actually going to target the connection string section. So I already have a connection string which is added by default when I create the project. But this connection string actually points to the local DB instance of SQL Server, which, as you remember, is on disk over here in these two files, MDF and LDF. So I want to change that. So the way I can do that is either I type out the new connection string in the web.config, or I use the Visual Studio IDE and I go into the View menu. I bring up the Server Explorer, and then I click on the new connection icon, and that's going to ask me where my SQL Server is. So if I just deploy the drop-down list again, it's going to go and look for all SQL Server instances on my network. And since this machine is running on a local network and there's only one SQL Server instance, it's only going to find one. You might not want to run this on an instance where on a machine where you have lots of SQL Server instances in your network, because it might take a while to find them all. So again, we're going to be using SQL Server Authentication. Let me put in the SA username and the password. I'm going to click on Save Password here, and then if all of these credentials are again correct, I should be able to find the database that I need in the drop-down list. So there we go. I've selected Web Sample Auth Store, and I'm going to click on the test connection just to make sure, and then I am going to click on the OK button. And what you see is that in here in the properties window from Visual Studio, I actually get the connection string that's based on all of the parameters that I provided to the wizard. So all I have to do is select this, come back into my web.config, replace the old connection string section in the web.config with the one that Visual Studio gave me, and then obviously put in the correct password here. There we go. And then save this up, and now the website is pointing to the new authentication store which I've created in SQL Server 2008. Now, for those of you who are not very comfortable with having the database password in the web.config in clear text, just let me remind you that there is a way to encrypt the connection string section of the web.config. So if you go to my bookmarking website, which is www.link with a q to to.me, and you go and do a search for ASP.NET, on the second page of the search results, you'll find two articles. Here they are. How to encrypt configuration sections in ASP.NET 2.0 with Err Rsa and with DP API. Now these articles were written on MSDN for ASP.NET 2.0, but they also apply for 4.0 and 4.5. And if you click on the little magnifying glass here, if you're authenticated on my website, it will actually let you add it to your favorites, so you can actually find it easier when you come back. So there's a very quick and easy way to encrypt the web.config when you deploy it to the production server. And the other thing I wanted to show was that all throughout this demo, I've been using SQL Server authentication. And to get that to work, what you need to know is that when you install SQL Server, by default, Windows integrated authentication is the only authentication method that is accepted. So what I did was I went up here to the SQL Server node. I clicked on the right-click button, and in the Properties menu, you have the Security section, and you want to make sure that the radio button, which says SQL Server and Windows Authentication mode, is checked, so that you allow both types of authentication, what SQL Server guys called mixed mode authentication. Otherwise, you will not be able to follow the examples in this tutorial. Okay, so now if I go ahead and run my website, once again, log in, and I'm going to try and log in with the username Paul and then demo@123, and I'm going to try and log in. It's going to tell me that the login attempt was unsuccessful, and this is because the Paul username was available and created in the Paul user account was created in the all local DB database, and now I'm pointing to a SQL Server 2008 database in which the user hasn't been created yet. So I need to go back to the registration page and create Paul once again and give Paul an address, contasso.com, and then provide a password again, and register. So there we go. Now the site is as it was before, except that we're using SQL Server 2008 as a authentication store. And it's just as easy to set up SQL Azure as an authentication store for the website, so that I can hold all of my authentication data in the cloud should I want to. To continue this tutorial, what I want to show is the authorization and access control rules for my ASP.NET website. So the aim of this video series is to build a web commerce application or an internet commerce application, which is going to allow people to shop for products online and allow store administrators to actually manage the shop. So what I want to do is I want to come back into my project and add a new folder, and this folder is going to be called Site Administration. And this site administration folder is going to contain all of the web interface that is needed for store administrators to create new product categories, edit product data, update products, and so forth. And so I only want the store administrators to be actually able to come into the site administration folder and access the web interface, which is going to be located in that folder. So to do this, I'm going to set up access and access control on my website. And the way to do this is I'm going to go into the project folder and I'm going to click on the ASP.NET configuration tool, which is just an ASP.NET website that is shipped with the .NET framework and which allows me to configure authorization and access control rules for my project. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go into the security section and I want to enable roles by clicking on the enable roles button down here. And roles are just like groups in Active Directory. They're a way of grouping users together and granting them privileges. So I've enabled roles. Now I'm going to create a bunch of roles. So the first role I'm going to create is site administrators. There we go. And I'm also going to create a second role called site users. So most of my users, all of my customers are going to be in the site users role, and all of my store administrators are going to be in the site administrators role. So now what I want to do is I want to add the account I've created for Paul into the site administrators role. So to do that, I'm going to click on the manage button, and then I'm going to go look for the account for Paul. Click on find user, and there is the Paul account, and I'm going to say user is in role so that I now make Paul a store administrator. And now I can go to back, and so now we've set up everything that is pertaining to roles in my website, but I also want to go in and grab roles. I want to set up access for those roles to specific parts of my website. So to do that, I'm going to go back into the security section, into the access rules section, and I'm going to click on the manage access rules button. And in the left side of my page, I can see my whole project structure, and I can find the site administrators folder, and now I can add access rules to it. So I can add new access rule. And the first rule I want to add is I want to say for all users that are not authenticated, I want them to be denied access to this folder, so that people that come to my website and that don't have an account, they can't access the store administrations page. The next rule I want to add is I want to say that everybody who's in the site administrators group gets access to this folder. And the third rule I want to add is anybody who's in the site users group is actually denied access to this folder. So there we go, we're done. And now if I close out of the browser and I come back to to Visual Studio, it's going to prompt me that the web.config file for my project has changed. And this is normal because the web interface wizard that I just accessed has taken those changes that I've asked it to do and placed them in the web.config. So I could have done everything manually if I wanted to. This is just a little bit more painstaking. So I'm going to reload the web.config file. And what it actually did, if I go into my project folder, is that in this underneath the site administration folder, it created a new web.config folder that was not there before. If I open that up with something like Notepad, you're going to see that there's only one section inside, which is the authorization section. And here I can see the 3 rules that I have created. So the first one says deny users equal question mark, which means deny access to all users that are not authenticated. The second one says allow roles site administrators, so grant every user that is in the site administrators role access. And the third is just deny roles site users. So this is how the authorization rules are set up for WebForms. So now, if you are interested in learning more about authorization rules, what I can suggest is that you go back to my bookmarking site, link2.me, and you go into the search page and you look for ASP.NET authorization. And you'll find an article in there that I've written a while ago, which actually walks you through how you would go about creating the same thing I just did via the web interface in code. And this is quite handy when you're trying to set up new roles and new access rules for your website. So when you deploy your website to a server, you want to make sure that certain roles exist, and if they don't exist, you want to create them, and certain access rules to certain folders exist, and if they don't, you want to create those as well. So this article comes with a complete guide on how to do that, including the complete code solution that you can have a look at. So I encourage you to look at that as well. So now to complete the demo, what I want to do is I want to actually go ahead and add a page to my site administration. So I'm going to go and say add new item, and I'm going to add a web form that is using a master page, and I'm going to call this categories. Oops, categories. And this is going to contain the listing of all of the product categories that I'm going to have in my web store. So it's prompting me to choose a master page. I'm going to choose the only one that is currently in my project. And there we go. We have a new page in there. I want to add some content to this page. So let's say, and then I'm going to call this categories listings. Save that, jump into the designer, see how it looks. And I don't like the way that the font is here. It's not bold, so let me just put a bold tag in there to make this font a little bit more visible. So here we go. And if I go back into design view, I still find it's a little bit small, so let's make that an H2 heading. Now watch what happens when I change the bold tag here to H2. Watch what happens to the closing tag. So let's just go do H2. So the end tag also changes to H2, meaning that until now Visual Studio didn't actually check the end tag and change it to match the starting tag. Now, if you have something like, for example, an update panel or a grid view, and you have lots of content in there, you don't have to manually go and change the closing tag for that to match the opening tag. Visual Studio is going to do that for you automatically. So now, if I run this website in Internet Explorer again, and I try to hit the categories.aspx page, what's going to happen is that I'm going to get redirected to the login page because unauthenticated users don't have access. So now if I log in with Paul, there we go. I see the page I've just created, which is called category listings with a nice H2 heading. So the next thing I want to show is if I create another user, let's go into the registration menu and I create a second user called Tom. And I'm going to give Tom an email address. And a password. And register Tom as a user. So there we go. Tom is now a registered user. And I'm going to go back into the project menu and I'm going to bring up the ASP.NET configuration tool yet again and add Tom to the site users group. So let's go back into the security section, create or manage roles, click on the site users role manage and find the user Tom and add it to this role. There we go, user is in role, back. So now Tom is part of the site users group or role. So if I fire up my website once again and I have Tom authenticate, so I point back to the categories page and that redirects me to the login page. And if I authenticate Tom, what's going to happen is that I'm going to come back to the login page, although Tom is authenticated, because Tom is part of the site users role and not the site administrators or the store administrators role. So he doesn't have access to the requested page. So that's how you set up the project template to work with SQL Server 2008 and how you set up access and authorization rules with ASP.NET 4.5. The next video that we're going to do is actually going to start out building the business logic layer for our website. And so stay tuned for the next video in the series. And until then, I hope you all have a fun time developing with ASP.NET 4.5.